I'm not sure whose idea it was for the evens to call out the odds, but hey, I'm all for it. That means I get to call up.
A secret buried too deep to ignore. A truth dangerous enough to tear apart everything built on trust. And the instant Daddy Dave finally breaks his silence, the world of Street Outlaws is pushed past the point of return. Loyalties are tested, alliances begin to crack, and a brotherhood forged on the streets finds itself standing on the edge of collapse. What follows isn't just fallout, it's a reckoning that will change everything. The call that fractured the night. The digital clock on Chief's nightstand glowed 2:41 in the morning when his phone exploded with a sharp ringtone that dragged him out of the fragile edge of sleep. His muscles throbbed from hours spent buried under the hood of a stubborn Chevrolet that refused to play nice, and his thoughts were still tangled in fading dreams of quarter-mile runs and engines screaming at full throttle. For a split second, he thought about letting the call die into voicemail, assuming it was another racer stuck in trouble, or a late-night tow issue that could wait until daylight. That instinct vanished the moment the name lit up his screen. A cold weight settled in his chest as recognition hit. Daddy Dave never called at this hour unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. Chief answered without hesitation, his thumb moving before his mind could fully process the warning bells already sounding. He lifted the phone to his ear, his heart rate climbing into territory that felt dangerous for someone who had lived on caffeine and adrenaline all week. "Chief," Dave's voice came through low and strained, wrong in a way Chief couldn't immediately define. There was a hollow edge to it, a tremble hidden beneath forced calm, like a man barely holding himself together at the edge of something irreversible. "I need you to listen to what I'm about to say, and I need you not to interrupt me until I'm finished. Can you do that for me?" Chief pushed himself upright, swinging his legs over the side of the bed as his bare feet met the cold floor. Every instinct screamed that this moment mattered. He had known Dave for more than 2 decades, watched him crawl out of wrecked race cars that looked like crushed soda cans, stood beside him through divorces, bankruptcies, and losses that would have broken lesser men. But he had never heard this tone before, this blend of resignation and tightly contained fury that promised whatever came next would change everything. "I found something," Dave continued before Chief could respond. "I found something that I can't unknow, and once I share it with you, once this information leaves the 4 walls where I'm standing right now, there's no putting it back in the box. The crew, the show, the streets, the brotherhood we've built, all of it is about to be tested in ways we've never experienced. And I'm not sure we're going to survive what comes next." Chief's mouth went dry as his thoughts spiraled through possibilities, each darker than the last. Federal investigations, undercover operations, informants, deaths that weren't accidents. His grip tightened until his knuckles burned, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded rough even to his own ears. "Where are you right now?" "The farm," Dave said. "I need you here within the hour. Bring Sean and Monza. Nobody else. Not until we figure out what we're dealing with and how deep this goes. If the wrong person finds out I have this evidence before we decide what to do with it, we're all in danger." The legend who bore the burden. Daddy Dave's climb through the ranks of Oklahoma City's underground racing world was never about luck or perfect timing. It was hammered into existence, shaped by fire and pressure, built on a foundation of 10,000 hours spent in shadowy garages where the sharp scent of race fuel blended with cigarette smoke and raw, desperate ambition. He began as a kid with more courage than common sense, lining up beat-up cars against hardened veterans who should have crushed him but somehow failed to do so. From the very start, there was something different in his approach to racing. He carried a measured aggression, a readiness to push both metal and muscle beyond sensible limits, and an almost eerie ability to read a stretch of pavement in the brief seconds before the light flashed green. The streets of Oklahoma City in the early 2000s were their own universe, where reputation was everything and a single mistake could cost more than money. Dave learned fast that respect wasn't as was handed out freely. It had to be earned through consistency, fearlessness, and a refusal to back down when someone called your name to the line. He built his first real race car using borrowed cash and scavenged parts, grinding through nights so long they bled straight into morning. He obsessed over every adjustment until the car reacted to his touch like it was wired directly into his nervous system. When he finally unleashed that machine on the streets and started beating drivers who had ruled those roads for years, people began to pay attention. His partnership with Chief soon became the stuff of legend. They were two racers whose styles fit together as if destiny had planned it. Chief brought calculated precision and engineering brilliance, while Dave supplied pure instinct and a fearless edge that flirted with recklessness. Together, they formed the backbone of what would become the 405 crew, a tight group that dominated their territory through skill, strategy, and an unbreakable loyalty tested by both triumph and loss. The path to legend, however, was lined with moments that almost ended everything. Dave's crash in 2015 should have called him, a violent, physics-defying impact that twisted the car into an unrecognizable mess and sent doctors reaching for words like critical and uncertain. He eventually walked away, but the damage ran deeper than scars anyone could see. Recovery was unforgiving, marked by months of therapy and quiet mental battles with fear, during late nights when thoughts of mortality crept in, along with the razor-thin line between life and death at 200 miles per hour. Still, Dave carried the image of the unbreakable fighter. The crew leaned on him for stability and leadership when things looked bleak. But maintaining that image came at a cost few understood. Every appearance, every race, every moment on camera required strength, even as old injuries screamed and doubts lingered unspoken. That pressure built slowly, like water rising drop by drop, until it hovered at the edge of spilling over. Dave had always carried everyone else's weight, but who carries the strong man when his own foundation begins to fracture? Those questions had haunted him for months before the discovery, hidden behind his calm exterior and familiar dry humor. The shadows that stretched further. The first person to sense something was different about Daddy. Dave was Monza, and it surfaced during what should have been a routine discussion about carburetor adjustments in late December of 2024. They stood in Monza's garage, surrounded by the familiar disorder of racing gear and half-assembled engines, walking through technical details that normally sparked lively debate and easy laughter. That day, though, Dave's replies were short and distant. When Monza joked about a mutual friend's questionable life decisions, Dave didn't even smirk. Instead, he stared at the workbench, his jaw working as if he were chewing on thoughts he couldn't bring himself to voice. Monza tried to ease into it, asking if everything was okay at home, if old injuries were flaring up again, or if Dave wanted to talk things through over a beer, away from the pressure and noise of racing. Dave brushed it off with practiced precision, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes, and redirecting the conversation so smoothly that Monza nearly convinced himself nothing had happened. Nearly. The discomfort lingered, like a splinter under the skin that refused to come out. Murder Nova noticed next during a crew meeting in early January, when they were mapping out the season and discussing potential challengers from other cities. Dave sat off to the side, unusually quiet, his attention fixed on his phone even though his eyes didn't seem to follow the screen. When Chief asked for his thoughts on accepting a challenge from a Texas crew, Dave answered several seconds too late, as if he'd been dragged back from somewhere far away. His response made sense on paper, tactically smart and strategically sound, but something about how he delivered it felt wrong to anyone paying attention. The late-night disappearances began around the same time. Dave had never kept normal hours, but this felt different. He'd arrive at the garage in the early morning smelling of road dust and exhaustion, offering vague explanations about scouting racing spots or meeting parts suppliers that didn't quite hold up under scrutiny. His phone was always in his hand. When it buzzed, he'd step away mid-conversation, retreating to corners to speak in low voices that made it clear the calls weren't casual. Chief noticed everything, mentally cataloging each strange moment with the same precision he used to diagnose engines. This wasn't just stress or personal trouble. It was something heavier. It was the kind of weight that reshapes a man, drawing shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. Chief tried repeatedly to give Dave space to open up, suggesting late-night drives, offering help without judgment, making it clear whatever came out would stay between them. But Dave stayed sealed behind walls, built with intention, deflecting every attempt with the ease of someone well-practiced in avoidance. Frustration spread through the crew as weeks passed with no answers. Rumors filled the silence, from health scares to private problems hidden from public view. The truth was far worse than anything imagined. Dave wasn't retreating because of personal struggles. He was pulling away because he'd uncovered something that threatened to rip apart the family they'd built. And the burden of protecting everyone while carrying that knowledge alone was slowly destroying him from the inside out. The evidence that changed it all. The garage where Daddy Dave chose to unveil his discovery sat on the fringes of Oklahoma City. The plain metal structure had once housed a small manufacturing operation before being converted into a storage space for racing equipment. Chief, Sean, and Monza arrived within minutes of one another, their vehicles crunching across the gravel lot in the pre-dawn darkness of a January morning. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and their breath drifted into the air in pale clouds as they stepped out. None of them knew exactly why they had been called together with such urgency, but the tone of Dave's voice left no doubt that this situation couldn't wait for daylight. Dave was already inside, standing beneath harsh fluorescent lights that cast deep shadows across a face that looked as though it had aged years in a matter of weeks. The garage itself had been stripped bare, its usual contents removed, leaving only a folding table at the center, surrounded by 4 metal chairs. Spread across the tabletop was an assortment of documents, photographs, computer printouts, and what appeared to be financial records, many marked with yellow highlights and covered in handwritten notes in Dave's sharp, angular script. The sheer volume suggested weeks, countless hours, spent assembling a puzzle no one else even knew existed. As Chief stepped closer and scanned the materials, his stomach sank. There were racing logs that didn't align with official records. Photographs taken with long lenses showed meetings between crew members and unfamiliar individuals. Bank statements revealed suspicious cash deposits, timed precisely with races where favored cars had suffered sudden, unexplained mechanical failures. There were screenshots of text messages written in coded language, discussing arrangements, payments, and outcomes that appeared to have been decided long before engines ever fired on race nights. This wasn't rumor or paranoia. It was organized, documented proof of corruption within their own ranks. "I've been digging into this since October," Dave said, his voice controlled despite the tremor in his hands as he shuffled the papers. "It started with timing irregularities from races last summer. Tiny discrepancies at first, fractions of a second that didn't line up when I compared them to onboard footage and GPS data. I figured it was faulty equipment or recording errors. But the deeper I went, the clearer the patterns became, and coincidence stopped being an explanation." Sean lifted one of the photographs, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition, settling into something that looked like pain. The image showed a member of their crew, someone they had trusted for years, meeting with a man connected to a rival racing organization. The location was behind a restaurant in a part of town people chose when they didn't want witnesses. "This goes back at least 2 years," Dave continued, positioning himself at the head of the table like a prosecutor. "Possibly longer, but 2 years is as far as I can prove. Someone inside our crew has been leaking information, sharing car specs, strategies, and race plans. And it's worse than that. There's evidence of sabotage. Races thrown on purpose, mechanical failures designed to happen at precise moments. Even crashes we believed were accidents may have been engineered." Monza's face drained of color. "You're saying some of the races we lost, some of the crashes that nearly called people, weren't just bad luck. Someone from inside our own family did this. Dave nodded slowly, the weight of the gesture pressing down on the room. Someone we trusted sold us out for money. A lot of money based on these records. Enough to outweigh loyalty, friendship, and honor. Chief clenched his fists as the implications crashed through his thoughts. How many close calls could have been avoided? How many wins stolen by someone meant to be on their side? "Who is it?" Sean asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Dave pulled a final paper from his jacket, holding it for a moment before setting it face down. "Once you see this, there's no going back. There will be confrontations, legal problems, media fallout we can't control. People will choose sides, and not all of them will choose ours." He turned the page over, revealing a name that struck them like a physical blow. Silence filled the garage, broken only by distant highway traffic and the buzz of fluorescent lights. The betrayal cut deeper because the name wasn't peripheral. It was someone at the core of everything they'd built. When brothers turn against each other. The fracture lines showed themselves within hours of Dave's revelation, spreading far beyond the four men who had stood together in that locked garage. Long before the sun fully rose, it was clear the entire crew knew something catastrophic had come to light. No one knew the full story. Dave and Chief kept the details locked down with deliberate care, but fragments slipped through anyway, and those fragments were enough to corrode trust. Suspicion moved faster than facts, turning longtime friends guarded, quiet, and defensive. The first open confrontation exploded inside Murder Nova's shop. Crew members arrived claiming they were there to work on cars, but it didn't take long for the real purpose to surface. They wanted answers. The accused traitor wasn't there. Dave had insisted they be kept away until decisions were made, but that absence only poured fuel on the anger already simmering. Voices rose, fingers pointed, and the arguments stopped being subtle. "Who gave you the right to play detective?" one crew member shouted. "You went behind the family's back, gathered evidence like a cop, and then dropped a bomb without giving anyone a chance to defend themselves." The room vibrated with tension. Before it could spiral further, Chief cut through the noise. Dave hadn't gone looking for trouble. He'd brought the evidence forward because it was overwhelming and serious. This wasn't rumor, gossip, or paranoia. It was documented betrayal that had cost races, money, and had nearly cost lives. It wasn't something words alone could erase. Even so, the crew fractured in ways no one had anticipated. Some stood with Dave immediately, believing exposing the problem was the only way to save what remained. To them, he'd cut out a cancer before it could spread further. Others saw something very different. They viewed his actions as a violation of sacred trust, insisting that family matters should never be reduced to documents and records that could fall into the wrong hands. The accused traitor's allies moved quickly to shape a counter-narrative. They claimed Dave had been compromised by resentment, paranoia, or a desire for control. His recent silence and withdrawal were suddenly framed as proof of instability. They demanded a public confrontation, convinced that anything less meant guilt had already been decided. Dave refused, citing concerns about intimidation and evidence tampering. That refusal only deepened suspicion. Sean found himself pulled in both directions. He had reviewed the evidence closely and knew dismissing it outright required willful blindness. At the same time, he'd trusted the accused for years, raced beside them, and relied on them when mistakes meant the difference between walking away and being carried out. Trying to reconcile hard proof with lived loyalty felt impossible. Then parts of Dave's evidence leaked beyond their circle. Within 48 hours, the story ripped through the underground racing world, distorted by rumor and speculation. Old losses were re-examined. Events were canceled. Crews from other cities started asking questions no one was ready to answer. The reputation they had spent years building began to crumble under the weight of doubt. Murder Nova attempted to step into the role of mediator, organizing meetings meant to calm emotions and restore unity. Instead, every gathering dissolved into shouting. Old grudges resurfaced. Unrelated conflicts were dragged into the open and weaponized. The brotherhood that once defined them now felt like an illusion shattered by truth. The toll on Dave was relentless. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't expected to be treated like an outcast by people he loved. There were moments when he wondered if silence would have been easier, if peace built on lies might have been better than truth that burned everything to the ground. Then he remembered the injured drivers, the lost money, the crashes that weren't accidents, and his resolve returned. Some truths were too important to stay buried, no matter the cost of uncovering them. The final reckoning. The decision to move forward took shape on a morning when freezing rain transformed Oklahoma City's streets into slick, dangerous sheets of black ice. It was the kind of weather where no one with common sense would consider racing. Yet plenty of people still pushed their luck behind the wheel. Dave sat alone in his garage, surrounded by the cars and tools that had defined most of his adult life, gripping a phone connected to an attorney who specialized in fraud and conspiracy cases. The discussion was cold and methodical, centered on standards of proof, potential criminal charges, and civil liability. It all felt strangely distant from the emotional destruction ripping through his racing family. "If you take this forward officially," the lawyer explained, his voice faintly crackling over the line, "you need to understand that you won't be able to control how far it spreads or who ends up caught in the blast radius. Law enforcement will be involved. There will be investigations that go beyond the individual you've identified. Financial records will be subpoenaed. People with no direct role in the betrayal may still face scrutiny if their names appear anywhere in the paperwork. This becomes much bigger than settling something inside your crew." Dave shut his eyes, the weight of that reality settling heavily on him. He'd started digging for answers simply because things didn't feel right. Timing patterns were off. Results didn't align. Doubts kept him awake long after engines cooled. He never intended to become a whistleblower or trigger the sweeping unraveling the lawyer described. Now he stood at a crossroads where every option carried devastation. And the choice wasn't about finding a safe path, but deciding which form of damage he could live with. The other option was the old way of handling things: street justice, internal resolution, the rough, unwritten code the underground had relied on before television crews, sponsors, and attorneys entered their world. That route meant confronting the traitor face to face, letting them answer to the crew they betrayed, and imposing whatever consequences the community deemed fair. It would be raw and possibly violent, with no official record to set precedent or discourage future betrayals. But it would keep the family's business inside the family, preserving the image of unity, even if the truth underneath was permanently altered. Chief arrived just as Dave ended the call, stepping into the garage without knocking, a privilege earned through 20 years of shared history. He didn't ask what Dave had decided. He simply pulled up a stool and sat nearby, knowing some moments required patience instead of advice. They sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, listening to rain pound the metal roof while dull gray light seeped through dirty windows. "I keep replaying every time I trusted my instincts," Dave finally said, his voice worn down by sleepless nights and emotional strain. "I built everything on being able to read situations, to feel when to push and when to pull back, to sense danger before it showed itself. And I missed this betrayal happening under my nose for years. What does that say about my judgment?" Chief slowly shook his head. "Your instincts didn't fail you. They're what made you notice something was wrong. They're what pushed you to dig when everyone else accepted easy explanations. This happened because someone became very good at hiding it, not because you lost the ability to see. Don't let this take away what makes you who you are." It helped, but it didn't erase the weight of the choice. Dave stood and moved toward a workbench where a photograph rested against a toolbox. It showed the entire crew gathered after a big win 5 years earlier, arms locked around shoulders, faces split by genuine smiles born from shared triumph. The accused traitor stood near the center, looking exactly like someone who belonged and would never think of tearing the group apart. "I'm moving forward," Dave said at last, the words feeling like a step into open air. "I'm handing everything to the authorities and letting it go wherever it goes. If that means some of our people face consequences for things they didn't directly do. If it costs us the show, destroys our reputation, or makes people I care about see me as the villain, then that's what happens. I can't live knowing I let a betrayal slide because dealing with it was uncomfortable." The formal complaint was filed 3 days later, triggering the exact kind of wide-ranging investigation the lawyer had warned about. Federal agents interviewed crew members, subpoenaed financial records, and examined race footage with forensic precision. Racing media broke the story first, followed quickly by mainstream outlets fascinated by the collision of underground culture and betrayal. Cameras that once captured victory celebrations now recorded a family tearing itself apart amid accusations and denials. The accused traitor was arrested on charges including fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, words that sounded surreal when applied to street racing but reflected the depth of the deception. Their defense team struck back immediately, portraying Dave as a bitter former friend driven by jealousy. Some crew members echoed that narrative publicly, questioning Dave's motives in interviews, behavior that would have been unthinkable only months earlier. Others responded with unexpected strength. Monza organized public support, bringing together drivers from multiple crews to show that confronting corruption was courage, not disloyalty. Murder Nova used his platform to defend Dave's integrity, insisting that hard truths had to be faced even when they hurt. Even some early skeptics began to reconsider as more details emerged, and the scale of betrayal became undeniable. The legal fight would stretch on for months, maybe years, and the Street Outlaws world would never return to the simpler version that existed before Dave's discovery. Trust once shattered that deeply could never be fully restored. Yet something surprising rose from the wreckage. A tougher, more honest sense of community that recognized human flaws while still demanding accountability. Daddy Dave would carry the scars of this chapter for the rest of his life, forever known as the man who broke the beautiful lie holding them together. But he would also know that when faced with the hardest choice of his racing career, he chose truth over comfort, accountability over blind loyalty, and the painful growth that comes from confronting betrayal instead of pretending it wasn't there. That understanding wouldn't erase the cost, but it would make the burden bearable. What started as a search for answers had now rewritten the fate of everyone involved. The fallout was far from over, and the consequences were only beginning to surface. Trust had been broken, alliances reshaped, and the line between loyalty and justice blurred beyond recognition. As the legal battle unfolded, and the racing world watched closely, one truth became impossible to ignore. Nothing would ever be the same again. And just when it seemed the damage couldn't go any deeper, another revelation was waiting in the shadows, one that would push this story even closer to the edge.